Hello and welcome to State of the Collection 2022. I thought you might be interested in seeing what things look like around here on a typical day, and you can see the collection as it stands somewhere in the mid-2022 range. So I should point out here that not everything you're seeing does belong to me. Stuff is here on loan for various reasons. Stuff comes in here, stuff leaves for various reasons, but you get a snapshot as to what the collection looks like as of today. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and start here in the garage. So when something is in the garage here, it's usually in here for one of the same 2 or 3 reasons. First, it's something that I use a lot and I need it here for quick deployment. Secondly, it's something here that's under review. And third, it's because it's just too big to bring inside. And you'll see examples of all 3 categories here. So in the category of stuff I use a lot and has to be deployed quickly, we have obviously the Orion XT8. This is the telescope you see me talk about all the time. By far, it's the telescope I use most often. If I'm running out the door, if I'm going to an event, I don't have to think about it. This is the one I just grab instinctively. Sometimes I'll take something else too, but the XT8 usually goes with me wherever I go. Next to it here we have Junior. This is the Orion XT 4.5. You saw me do a review on this one, and I think when I bought this thing, I got it really cheap off Craigslist. The idea was that I would review it and then I would give it away or sell it. But you know, when I started using this thing, this is kind of like this, and I decided to just keep it. Had some guys over here, you know, they'll bring their kids over, and the XT8's eyepiece height may be a little bit too high for a kid, but down here, this is much lower, it's much more accessible, and it's also a lot less valuable. So if anything were to happen to it, I wouldn't be quite so upset. A lot of people ask what eyepiece I use in the XT8. This is the Teleview 27mm Panoptic. It is more or less permanently grafted to this focuser. The only other eyepiece I use a lot in this scope is the Teleview 13mm Nagler. So yes, with all the telescopes, with all the eyepieces I have around here, those are the 2 eyepieces that get used the most often. Over on this side here, we have a Galileo CT1380. Yes, I actually have a telescope from this manufacturer here. So, and I'm actually going to review it. So when I bought something off a club member recently, this thing was sitting in pieces in a box in the corner, and he says, "Well, do you want that? Just take it with you." And so I said, "Sure, I'll take it and play with it and review it, and we'll decide what to do with that afterwards." Over on the side here, I'm sometimes asked what my favorite astrophotography telescope is, and it's this one. It's the Takahashi FS60. Really small, compact, and simple rig by modern astrophotography standards, but you know, a lot of astrophotography is counterintuitive. This is small, it's light, it's compact, and there's not much to it, but you know, if you get a telescope of high enough quality, you get a good autoguider on it, a high quality field flattener, this thing really packs a punch if you know how to use it. So the simplicity is actually a good thing, because I recently went to our dark sky observing site and there were 5 or 6 complicated astrophotography rigs out there. I had by far the most simplest rig of anybody there, and by the end of the evening, 2 of those really fancy rigs had stopped working for one reason or another. So let's get this stuff out of the way and you can see what's in the second row. Okay, so what we have here on this side is a Celestron C11 optical tube. This is one of the earlier models, and it's on a Celestron CGE mount. You've heard me talk about this mount before. It's a really good, solid, heavyweight mount. It's based on the Losmandy G11, and yes, unfortunately, this one does have the dreaded CGE runaway mount problem. What happens is these connectors here for the RA and DEC cables, the jacks aren't all that great, and if you touch the cables, this thing could just start running away by itself. Sometimes it'll run away by itself without you touching anything. It's disconcerting because it means the mount must be attended to at all times. I can't start an astrophotography session and go inside and do something. I have to actually be here, because if the mount runs away, it can actually run into itself. But anyway, very rare that we can use something of this focal length consistently here in this changeable weather in the Northeast, but on those really great nights, boy, is this thing terrific. So over here we have, let's go ahead and pull this out. It is a Lunt double stacked 100 universal telescope, and this is built as a solar telescope. It's a 4-inch f7.7 triplet, but it's a convertible. So what happens is these two etalons here, these are the tuning mechanisms for solar observing, can come out. This entire back part of the scope comes out. This focuser comes out, and you can put in an astronomical focuser, and you can use it at night. So that's right. This grants the possibility that you can be with your telescope 24/7. We're living the dream, aren't we? Okay, so here's two other telescopes that live in the garage. One is the 12-inch Celestron Star Hopper. The other is the Orion Starblast 6. This is an optical tube only that came off of a Starblast. I forget what happened to the base, but I just have the optical tube, and I just mounted on this Vixen Porta here that you've seen me talk about. Seems to work okay for star parties. Sad to say, and I've said this before, the optics in this particular Starblast, it's one of the worst telescopes I've ever owned. It's not sharp over about 40 power. It's just not very good. But you know what? For casual use, for very low power, wide field sweeping views at star parties, this can be okay. Here we have a Celestron 12-inch Star Hopper. You've seen me carry this thing in the intro and the outro of the Q&A sessions. This is okay. I don't think this is great. I'm going to be seeing if I can do some modifications on this. And the problem here, surprisingly, is the altitude bearing. This sort of, turn knob system here with the ball bearings here. It's not great. You never get the tension right. And again, that's unusual for a mass market Dob. Usually on these cheap Dobs, the altitude axis is okay. It's the azimuth here that causes you the problems, and that axis isn't actually all that great either. So there is some work that has to be done on this. But this one happens to be worth it because the mirror, I think, is really good on this. The optics are really nice. So maybe we'll get a club member to build me an extra Dob base for this, and we can toss this stock Dob base and make this a little bit more useful from now on. And finally, here we have the good old 20-inch Obsession. This is here on what I'm calling a semi-long-term loan situation. We have a club member who's going to be out of the area for quite some time. This was in storage, and he said, Ed, do you just want to go get that and take it out and put it in your garage? At least it will get used until he can get back here and deal with the situation that he has. So sure, I said I would do that. And already in the time that I've had it, I've shown this to many people, so I'm trying to stay in the spirit of the person's intentions. But anyway, as you can see, this is obviously too big to store inside. If you don't know these telescopes, I am going to be doing a review on this, but the eyepiece is here, and I'm going to actually pan it out of the frame. But with the telescope pointed up, you actually do need to get on a stepladder to do this. Kids love this. Okay, so now we're inside the house, and just so you're situated, this door leads to the garage where you just saw we filmed some stuff here, and I'm not thrilled with the way this room is laid out right now because there are just way too many telescopes here. I've got to get better at this. So they're not always arranged like this on the floor. I usually sort of push them out towards the walls so that you can't notice them, but that doesn't really work because I'm not sure if anybody walks into the house for the first time if this is what they really need to be seeing. But anyhow, the centerpiece here is, of course, this Meade research grade Newtonian. This is the model number 880, 1980s vintage. One of the best things Meade ever did, these rotating rings. I really wish the industry would bring these things back. And as a kid, always wanted one of these. Used to sit up at night reading the Meade catalog and wondering how I'd ever be able to afford one. But I found one on Craigslist, and it wasn't that much money, and have that. And I have to learn to take that thing out more often. I don't do that very much just because of the size and the weight. I may rig something with casters or something rolling so that I can get it out more often. So back here in the corner is the regular version of that research grade Newtonian. This is the Meade model number 856. It's an 8-inch f6 Newtonian. And again, another Craigslist find, and it is just in really good condition. Just some minor condition issues here on the tube and on the shaft here. I think I can get together with the guys and we can get that restored and get it in very good condition. Here we have a Celestron Nexstar 5 SE. And here, so let's go from that side over. The blue tube there is a Meade 10-inch f10 Schmidt-Cassegrain. It is a deforked LX50 model. That is a real sleeper in this collection. It's one of the very best telescopes that I've owned and one of the very sharpest telescopes I've ever seen. A little bit unusual, you don't often see a Meade Schmidt-Cassegrain mentioned in that category. This is the Vixen R200SS. That is the Japanese 8-inch f4 Newtonian. Very sharp telescope there. I have two C9¼ This is the base unit here, and this is the Edge variant. Obviously, you're seeing the Edge version here set up for imaging. This is the camera here. It's a QHY camera. We've got a filter wheel, off-axis guider, 0.7 reducer, dew heating system, and I don't have the motorized focuser attached just yet. So this thing here is an Intez Altair M715. This is a 7-inch f15 Maxitov, and obviously the model there was the Questar, and this thing is just fantastic. It's hard to find, and they are expensive, somewhere around $5,000 US when they were last seen. This is one of the very sharpest lunar telescopes I think I've ever seen in my life. Around the front here, you have the ETX collection. That is thankfully getting smaller. I used to have so many of these things. I'm convinced they multiply. Those of you who know me well know that I'm not a fan of ETXs. I find they're cheap pieces of plastic that have a tendency to break. And so what happens is when the drive bases fail, the optical tubes wind up orphaned and sold off. And as you can see, that's what's happened here. I have an ETX90 optical tube assembly. We've got an ETX125 optical tube assembly. This one, of course, as you can see, has been heavily modified. And we have a base unit here, ETX90. This red tube, this little thing you're seeing down here, is a Tasco number 9VR. And you may be asking yourself, what am I doing with a modern Tasco in my collection? Well, that's another sleeper also, because some of these red tube Tascos were made by Vixen, as was this one. That is very, very sharp. And finally down here we have the Skywatcher Star Adventure mount. This is a camera tracking platform. It can also, in a pinch, double as a small equatorial mount. I don't recommend that you use it that way every day. It is inconvenient, but in a pinch, you can use it that way. This thing's been all over the world with me. It got lost in luggage on the way from Chile in 2018. I thought I would never see it again, and 2 weeks later it showed up at my doorstep. But anyway, this thing's been bashed around. These controls and knobs, half of them are barely working, and at some point I know this is going to fail on me, and I'm probably going to have to get another one. So there you have it, and wait, where's my C6? I have a C6 around here. It's not in the garage, it's not here, it's not over there. Hold on a second. I found it. I have C6. This one was bought as an optical tube only, and it's been one of my workhorse telescopes. This one gets looked through quite a bit. Okay, so now we're zooming in from what you saw before. I have two shelves, one running this way and the other running perpendicularly that way. This is where a lot of the nice refractors live, and we'll pan the camera around and show you what's on the other wall here. But over here we have the Takahashi FS102. Many of you may recall this one started life as a blue telescope. It was very well painted. It was a great paint job, but I wanted it to be original, so it started me down this adventure of getting this thing apart and getting it painted white again. Very pleased to have this back, and it's set up for imaging right now. I have the dedicated f6 focal reducer and field flattener. That's an amazing hunk of glass. So this is the Astrophysics Stowaway, latest version here, and this is the Astrotech AT72. This is the Mark I version. The aluminum case you see there is the case that came with it, and I pulled the scope out just so you can see this. So just so you know, I don't love this arrangement here. I don't like keeping telescopes on shelves. The reason being, if something is on a shelf, they have a tendency to wind up on the floor when you least want them to. And I hang around this hobby long enough, it's going to happen to you. I'm sorry it will. But I've got to find another solution other than getting these things up off the floor. Okay, so now we've pivoted 90 degrees to this wall here. And over here we have titanium Lightspeed Gonzalo with a Zip 303 tubular wheel set. I used to race in the amateur divisions, and this was the bike I raced on. I appear to have gotten older, which tends to slow you down a little bit. Yeah, that's annoying. I don't really feel like selling this thing because of all of the great memories that I had with it. So let's wheel this thing out of the way. So again, on this wall, we have mostly nice stuff. We've got a Questar optical tube assembly. This is the Takahashi FC76. This is one of my favorite telescopes of all time. And next to the Orion XT8 and probably the C6, this is the telescope that gets used visually the most often, and it's one of the most used telescopes for imaging as well. I have the dedicated field flattener here for it. Again, an amazing piece of glass coming from Takahashi. What we have here is another FS60. Yes, I have two of these. And if you notice, the one in the garage has been set up for imaging. This one has been set up for visual use. This may be the sharpest telescope that I own. Now, that's just one aspect of a telescope. I wouldn't advise a beginner to get one of these. It doesn't gather very much light. But as a second or third telescope, something for imaging, I very strongly recommend that. And on the end here, we have the Takahashi Sky 90. Okay, so this is the area by the desk where you often see me sitting. As you may be able to tell, this area is normally a complete mess. In fact, these videos are very often nothing more than an excuse for me to clean this area. But anyhow, this is what it looks like. Normally, I have some stuff piled up here, and you don't see these lights on, but if you want to see what it looks like when I actually turn these on, that's probably a little bit closer to what you're used to seeing. But anyway, we have Orion Short Tube 80, Orion Star Blast. This is the second Meade number 856, the first one you saw over there. This one came in better condition. I found it in a pawn shop. They weren't asking very much money for it, and in fact the accessories alone were worth what they were asking. This is the Meade 645, the 6-inch f5 Newtonian, again from the 1980s. I did an entire video on this one. And the 6-inch f8 Newtonian towards the end there is the Meade model number 591. That's my very first telescope. I worked at a certain fast food restaurant at sub-minimum wage for I don't know how many months, $2.85 an hour just to buy that thing. And when I called them up, of course, they told me it's out of stock and it's going to be 4 months delivery. Waiting for your telescope seems to be a rite of passage in this hobby, isn't it? But anyhow, it came in around 2.5 months. I just came home from school one day and there were these giant boxes lined up on the front lawn, and I don't think my parents were all that thrilled at these giant boxes, but boy, did I feel like I had just won the lottery that day. And here we have an AP130 GTX, GTX of course denoting the larger focuser. And you can just barely see this is a Meade 8-inch LX200 fork assembly and optical tube. I have people ask me, why is this down here like this? And I'll tell you the reason. I have no idea. It's sitting on a plastic box here, and one day I just set it on the box, and for whatever reason, I never took it off. It's just been sitting here for over a year. So sometimes I get the question is, what are these two blue bags sitting in the corner here? Well, those are my buddies. Smokey and Ewok. They were the best cats in the whole world. They were always together. They were brothers. And back when I was working, I would sit at this desk and I would work, and they would just sort of sit there together, hunched over, sort of huddled together, and they would watch me. They were very rarely apart. It was really rare that you saw one of them in one part of the house and one in the other part of the house. They were always together. So when they passed, I'm just putting them there because that's where they like to be, and I thought that would be a nice gesture for them. So what we have up here is vintage and or unclassifiable stuff. I'm trying to be good here. Vintage collecting is a rabbit hole that you can go down. I don't have a lot of these. I know some of you people out there who collect vintage scopes. You guys are crazy. But all the way on the end here, careening out of the frame as the Unitron 4-inch f15 number 152. It is a great showpiece, and everybody who comes in here asks about it. It is unfortunately the telescope with the worst optics in my entire collection. I talked about this before. I have a feeling I know what's wrong here. It was fashionable at some point to take the lenses out and clean them for some reason, and often they were put in backwards or incorrectly, and the optics were just terrible. That is unusable at any magnification right now. I still have to get a couple of the guys in here so that we can think about fixing it. Here's a Takahashi FC100 on an EM200 mount. This should be roughly period correct. The early EM200s did not have the go-to system, and my understanding is you can't retrofit the go-to system to the old one because the motors aren't strong enough. But that's okay because it's a great mount, and that's a great scope, and that's a terrific combination and an historic piece as well. We have two Tascos here. These are early Japan Tascos before the brand went to the brand we all love to hate. This is the 60 millimeter, and this is the 80 millimeter. Both of these are in really good condition. And in front here are two telescopes that I made or sort of made. This is one that I talked about in scope reviews. I ground the mirror, I laid out all the parts, and a club member helped me cut the wood. I admire those of you who make telescopes. I'm telling you, I'm glad I did this. I will never do it again. It was such a huge pain in the neck. But anyway, it's a 6-inch f7.15. Yes, that's unusual. I was going for f7. I missed. It's an f7.15. I still take this thing out and show people to show what can happen if you decide to build your own telescope. And this is a 4.5-inch f8 Newtonian. I got the optics in a little wooden box at NEAF, and I remember it was really cheap, somewhere around $40 or $60 with the case, with the mirror cell, and with the secondary holder. Couldn't turn it down, decided to make a telescope out of it, and same deal, I had a club member help me with the woodworking here, but like many Russian optics, really, really nice. How many telescopes is that? I don't know. I suppose some eagle-eyed viewer is going to count them and let us know in the comments below. So anyway, I hope you found this interesting and useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.